Hey friends, it's me, Em again, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things sinister. If you are interested in true crime or if you like all things horror related, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. That way you can join me for some morbid conversation. Now, for today's story, I have been wanting to get into another woman killer here lately. But the issue that I run into when I look into women who kill or women who are serial killers, more often than not, they tend to fall into one of three separate categories. The first category is nurses who kill or medical professionals who kill. And they either do that intentionally by just purposely taking out one of their patients or unintentionally, where they may overdose their patient or give their patient an incorrect drug, but with the hopes of coming in at the last minute and saving that patient's life, and they're unsuccessful and the patient dies. And it wasn't the person's intention, it just happened to happen. The other category of women who kill tends to kill their partners, kills their boyfriend, kills their husband. And the last category of women who kill tend to be women who kill their children. Now, with the first two categories, in my opinion, it seems as though they're all very similar stories to each other, meaning one nurse who kills is going to be very, very similar to another nurse that kills. There's not a lot of differentiation between a lot of these. I'm not saying that there are none, but a lot of the times the cases seem very, very similar. When a woman kills her partner, again, a lot of times the motives and the stories are very, very similar. The husband or the spouse is cheating on her. She has some sort of where she finds another woman or for a life insurance policy. There are obviously outliers, but again, it seems very, very similar to me in all those different stories. And then the last category are women who kill their children. And I have talked about it before on this channel. Kids are hard for me. I fill a lot of my free time with true crime stuff, either researching for this channel or watching other creators that I enjoy watching, listening to podcasts that I enjoy, reading true crime books even. And I'm a stay-at-home mom, so I do this in the nooks and crannies of my day, either during nap time or like right now, it's 9:30 at night and my girls are upstairs sleeping. So I'm constantly surrounded by the presence of my children. I'm constantly reminded of these little people in my life. And so talking about the deaths of children at the hands of murderers is just really hard on me because it's hard for me to separate myself from my kids who are right here. They're right upstairs or they're right in the other room. It's hard for me to separate that. Even more so when we're talking about a mother who is doing this to her children because I I can't relate. I mean, not that I relate to other murderers, but this is like the anti-relate. Like, you know what I mean? I'm so far removed and so appalled by it that it's very hard on me. However, like I said, I have been wanting to do a story on a woman. Again, it's been a while since I've talked about a woman because men have the monopoly on murder. But I've been wanting to talk about a woman, and I did come across a case of a woman who did kill her children, but this case interested me so much because she killed 7 children between the years 1976 and 1990, and she did it in plain sight. And what I mean by that is with every child that had passed, she took them to the hospital. She took them to the emergency room. She called 911 every single time. And somehow she flew under the radar for 7 children dying before police looked into her. And to me, that is bananas. That is absolutely wild to me. So even though it involves children, I think it's interesting enough to talk about. With that being said, obviously, if children are hard on you, like they're hard on me, that's extensively what we're going to be talking about today. This is strictly babies and toddlers. And so it is hard. It is very rough, but that's the case we're going to be going over today. So the woman we are going to be talking about today is Diana Lumbrera. And our story starts in 1974 when Diana married Lionel Garza. She was only 17 years old at the time, and the two of them would end up having 3 children together. And all 3 of those children would end up passing before they had their 4th birthday. Melissa was born in 1975. Her sister, Joanna, was born in 1976, and their brother, Jose Lionel, was born in 1977. So the first death would occur before Jose was born and when Joanna was only 3 months old. Diana would bring her to the hospital in Bovina, Texas, and Joanna was dead on arrival when she was brought to the hospital. Diane would explain to the hospital staff that Joanna had begun to convulse, and after convulsing for a little bit, she would stop to breathe, and Diana would put her in the car and rush her to the hospital in a panic, and when she got there, Diana had already passed. Now, going off of what Diana had told them, the pathologist at the hospital deduced that Joanna likely had a rare convulsion disorder, and this caused her to experience strangulation. And they pretty much just chalked it up to a very unfortunate event. And because of this explanation, they didn't do an autopsy on the baby. They just wrote it off as an unfortunate event that happened. On February 10th, 1978, when Jose was only 2 months old, Diana would bring him to the hospital. And she would bring him to the hospital for the same reasons. She would say that he was convulsing and that these convulsions led to him not breathing. And so she packed him up and she rushed him to the hospital. Fortunately for Jose, they were able to revive him there at the hospital. However, just because he was breathing again doesn't mean that he just gets to go home. We have a 2-month-old baby that came to the hospital. They were not breathing. They had convulsions caused by some unknown reason, and they wanted to keep him there to monitor him and to see what was going on, what caused this to happen. They wanted to run tests, and they wanted to monitor him. So they transferred him to the pediatric ICU so that way they could keep an eye on him and they could run tests on him. And he did fine in the hospital. He was there for a few days. He didn't have any other hiccups in the hospital. He didn't have any more convulsions. He didn't have any more issues until February 13th. And on February 13th, in the middle of the day, the alarm in his room sounded to notify nurses to respond to the patient. And so when nurses went into his room to see what was going on with him, Diana was seen backing away from the crib. Now again, nurses were able to go in there to respond, and it would end up being not a big deal. The baby was fine. They got him responsive. Not a big deal. He was back to being stable pretty quickly. Like, the nurses were not concerned. The doctors were not concerned. He was fine. However, Diana would end up calling her husband and telling her husband that their son was dying, despite the fact that doctors didn't seem to be on the same page that she was. However, around 6:30 that night, nurses would see Diana running from her son's room in tears, and when they would go into the room, they would find baby Jose unresponsive, and despite giving him CPR for a half hour, they were unable to bring him back, and baby Jose ended up passing away that day. So at this point, Diana has 3 children, and she's lost 2 of them so far in under a year's time frame. And these 2 children, according to her, were lost shortly after having convulsions, which led to them not breathing. And she's still not being investigated. Their case still isn't being looked into. It's still being written off as like just a fluke medical issue, which to me, maybe because I'm not in the right field, but as an outsider, I feel like this raises some red flags. Even if they aren't suspicious of Diana, I feel like an autopsy needs to be done or an investigation needs to be done because she has 3 kids. And so far, 2 of those 3 kids died of what appears to be the exact same thing. You would think you would want to figure out what that thing is for the sake of the 3rd kid. If it's something genetic, which if you're not suspicious of Diana and you think that these are just medical anomalies that are occurring, that tells me, since it's happened to 2 of them, that it's something that could potentially be genetic. You would think that you would want to know what that is so that way you're better prepared for it in case it happens to the 3rd child. Right? But nobody's looking into this. Nobody is looking into this, and Diana is just going on her merry way. And that is so unfortunate because Joanna and Jose are just the beginning. As we know, 5 more children are going to lose their life before Diana is stopped. So 8 months after the death of Jose, Diana would end up going back to the hospital, and this time she would enter the hospital holding her eldest child, Melissa, who was barely 3 years old at the time. And she would bring her into the hospital, and she would give the hospital staff the same story, that she had convulsions, and shortly after having convulsions, she stopped breathing. And when she was brought into the hospital, like her sister, she was dead on arrival, and there was nothing the hospital staff could do for her. This time, the pathologist looked into her and discovered that she had asphyxiated due to vomit in her throat, which, knowing what we know now, knowing that Diana is the one who suffocated and strangled these children, this one hurts me the most out of all 3 thus far. And it's not because babies aren't sad. Obviously, babies are very sad. But Melissa is 3 years old. I have a little girl that is not even 3 years old yet. She's almost 3. But she knows me. She loves me. She talks to me. We have conversations. She asks for things. She's smart. She's a person. I'm not trying to say that babies aren't a person, but she has personality and she has opinions and conversations. And I'm her person. And she loves and trusts me more than anything else. And I guess it's just knowing that she asphyxiated on her own vomit. To me, I imagine that the stress and the fear and the anxiety and the what the hell is happening, why is mama doing this to me, is what caused her to vomit and caused her to choke on that vomit. And as a mama, I that one hurts the hardest for me because by 3 years old, you know your mom, you trust your mom. Your mom is your person, and she betrayed the trust of that little teeny tiny person. And I just can't wrap my brain around it. This right here, moments like this, are the reason why these stories are so hard on me, because the part of the story I relate to are having these teeny tiny people in my life. I have a little girl who's 2.5. I have a little girl who's 4 years old. I can't help but put my little girl in that position and in that thought and think, oh my God, what would my baby be feeling in that moment? And it's brutal to think about as a mom. It's brutal to think about, but I can't stop my brain from going there, which is why I don't really like to talk about stories like this. I can't keep my brain from going there and relating it with my own children. So, moving on from that. In 1979, Diana and her husband would end up getting a divorce. But Diana would end up having another child by another man in 1980. And Melinda would be the first of three more children that Diana would end up having with three more different men. So, also in the year 1980, on October 8th, Diana would end up taking her cousin's daughter, Erica Ailman, who was 6 weeks old at the time, for a drive. And to me, it is just wild. And maybe it's because I'm blinded knowing what I know about this case, but it is just wild to me that she is given free access to these children after having three children die in her care. To me, that's just, even if it is a fluke accident, the superstitious in me would not be leaving my kids with her. Like, even if what happened was an accident, I'm too superstitious. I don't see myself doing it. But she had Erica, and Erica was just a teeny tiny little baby. Within 30 minutes of them setting out on their drive, Diana would end up bringing Erica to the hospital. And she brought Erica to the hospital dead on arrival. And she told the hospital the same song and dance that she has been giving this whole time. Erica experienced convulsions, which led to her stopping breathing. And in a panic, she brought her to the hospital. So by now, that is 4 children that has died under Diana's direct supervision of supposedly the same thing. And yet, that still was not enough for them to contact the police or warrant any kind of investigation. Erica's death was written off as an oddity, and Diana was free to go. So after the death of Erica, Diana would end up taking a short little break, but she wouldn't be able to fight the compulsion for very long. And on August 17th, 1982, she would end up calling emergency personnel to her home. And when emergency personnel would respond to their home, her 2-year-old daughter, Melinda, would already be dead. This time, it was reported that she died of heart failure. And despite the fact that this is now the 5th child that died under Diana's supervision, nothing was said about it. It was documented that she likely had an underlying heart disease that was just undiagnosed, and that was it. They pretty much just wrapped it up, and Diana was able to go on her very merry way. A little over a year after Melinda's death, Diana would have another child by a different man, and this would be a little boy named Daniel. Now, on March 25th, 1984, when he was less than 6 months old, so still a baby, he was seen by a doctor for an ear infection. And it is worth noting, when he was seen for this ear infection, that they, did a couple basic tests, and they did in fact draw his blood while he was there being tested for this ear infection. 3 days after this doctor visit, a doctor visit that noted that the only problem that Daniel had was an ear infection, Diana would bring him to the hospital, dead on arrival, and this time it was noted that he had septicemia. Now, septicemia is a fatal blood infection, which is very bizarre because, like I said, when he was seen 3 days beforehand, they had taken his blood and they had run tests on him, and nothing came back off. The only issue he had was an ear infection. No other, nothing. Nothing else was wrong with him. And then 3 days later, he has septicemia, which is a fatal blood infection. But still, instead of saying, this is weird, something's up, instead of saying any of that, they just ruled it as some sort of medical fluke anomaly and sent Diana on her way. Like, to me, this looks like such a red flag. Like, even if you discount the fact that all these other babies and toddlers have already died under her care, they just did blood work on this baby. And it was fine. And now his blood is so bad that it's killing him. Like, do you see why this case interests me so much? Because how does this shit keep happening? So in 1985, Diana decided to move from Texas to Kansas. And she was almost immediately pregnant again by another man. And this child would be her last child, and it would be a son. And he would be born on February 21st, 1986. And his name was also Jose, but this was Jose Antonio. Now, Diana would hold on to Jose Antonio for a little bit longer than the others, and he would be earthside for a little over 4 years and a couple months before Diana would end up bringing him to the hospital there in Kansas. And again, like almost all the others, he was dead on arrival when he got there. Now, the people in Kansas caught on a lot quicker than the people in Texas, because the people in Texas never caught on. The people in Texas, like, she was just able to keep killing kids, and nobody in Texas seemed to piece 2 and 2 together. But when Jose was brought to the hospital in Kansas, they had caught on. The day before Jose was brought to the hospital dead on arrival, Diana actually took him to the doctor. And when she took him to the doctor, she had told the doctor the same thing that she had been saying about all these other children. Jose was getting convulsions, which would lead him to stop breathing. And so she brought him to the doctor. And in hindsight, a lot of people look at this as laying the groundwork for like an alibi for her. She brought him to the doctor to make it look like he really was having convulsions and not breathing. So that way when she would suffocate him and take him to the hospital, she already had a story built up of a background history of these convulsions. The doctor couldn't find any reason why Jose would be having convulsions, which led him to not breathing. But the doctor would end up writing a prescription for an antibiotic to just better be safe than sorry. You know, maybe there is something that's causing it that the doctor doesn't know. So he wrote a prescription for her, and she never got that prescription filled, which fuels a little bit more of, this isn't a real medical issue. This is just setting up an alibi. That kind of leads into that theory a little bit more. Because if she was really worried about him having convulsions, which led to him not breathing, you'd fill the prescription. So, like I said, the hospital would end up calling the police on Diana. And when they did, the police would start to launch an investigation into not only Jose, but it would get back to Texas and it would launch an investigation there in Texas too. And some of the noteworthy things that the investigation turned up is, one, she was collecting life insurance on all these kids, but she was collecting anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 per child, obviously, with the exception of Erica, because Erica wasn't her child. In fact, Melinda had just been put on a life insurance policy the day before she died. So that's pretty noteworthy, pretty suspicious. The other thing that came up in the investigation is only Diana had witnessed any of these convulsions. Not her husband, not hospital staff, not doctors, not friends, not neighbors, only Diana. Which, again, is pretty suspicious. And one of the final pieces of noteworthy information is all except Jose Lionel. Every other child that had passed under Diana's supervision was already dead when she brought them to the hospital or when she contacted for medical help. They were already past the point of being able to help. So that is another noteworthy thing that just makes Diana look suspicious, which is what I've been saying this whole time. I don't know why it took the deaths of 7 children over the course of 1976 to 1990 for them to finally start putting these pieces together, but thank God they finally do. Because who knows how many more kids she would have popped out just to kill. It was because of this that Diana Lumbrera would end up being indicted in Kansas for the murder of Jose Antonio and again indicted by a grand jury in July of 1990 in Palmer County, Texas, for the first-degree murder of 3 of her children, Joanna, Melinda, and Melissa. Lubbock County in Texas would also hit Diana with charges in Antonio Lionel's death, and Castro County would indict her for Erica Ailman's death. When she went to trial in Kansas, the deaths in Texas were barred from being talked about for this particular case. However, the evidence presented in this case, even without the mentioning of these 6 other children that had died, was enough to persuade a jury to find her guilty and sentence her to life in prison with the minimum of 15 years before being eligible for parole. After being sentenced in Kansas, Diana would return to Texas, where she would plead guilty to Melissa's murder, while the charges involving Melinda and Joanna would be dropped. She would plead no contest to the death of Jose Lionel, and she would receive another life sentence. So according to Diana and Diana's sister, all of this happened because her mother-in-law had put a curse on her that all her children would die at a young age. And this is what Diana said. And Diana's sister said that she had heard her mother-in-law say this and that otherwise Diana was a great mother and she would never do this. Now, obviously, the mother-in-law denied this and Diana's ex-husband also denied this. And even if it were true, which I don't believe it is, but let's feed into it for a second. Even if Diana genuinely believed this, why'd she keep having kids? After the first 3 died, you'd think, oh shit, maybe this curse is real. Maybe I should stop having babies. But she didn't. She kept having babies and she kept killing those babies. So Diana was released from prison in Kansas in September of 2004, and she was released in September of 2004 so that way she could be transferred to Texas to start serving her sentencing there. And I'm going to be honest with you, I think one of the most surprising parts of this story for me is the fact that this woman killed 7 children. Now, she wasn't found guilty on all 7 children, but even if she wasn't found guilty, she killed 7 children. And the fact that she was found guilty for more than one child, or even just one child, it really surprises me that Texas didn't give her the death penalty. I mean, no matter how you feel about the death penalty, whether you're for it or whether you're against it, you cannot argue that Texas is for it. And Texas kills people who kill people. And the fact that her victims were children, I feel like Texas would be very motivated to kill child killers. But they didn't. They just gave her, prison time, which, like I said, that almost surprises me more than the fact that she was able to get away with it for so long. So anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on this case. Is your mind absolutely blown like mine is that she was able to kill 7 children before they finally said, hey, maybe we should look into this? Because I'm still reeling over it. I still cannot wrap my brain on how she was able to get away with this for years before anybody said anything and before she was stopped. you know, but that's all I got. And yeah. Anyway, friends, that is all I've got for today's story. I didn't necessarily find it enjoyable because it's my least favorite topic. I hate talking about the loss of life when it comes to children, but I did think that it was interesting. And if you vibe with that, and if you also thought it was interesting, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because that's the kind of content that I put out. And I'm trying to put it out often. I always have something going on, either researching, filming, editing, or posting. I'm always working on something for this channel. So if this is the kind of content that you're interested in, make sure you're subscribed. And if you want to be notified the next time I sit down here for another morbid chat, make sure you have your post notification bell turned on. And that will let you know the next time I upload a new video. And until then, as I always say, friends, take care, stay safe, and I'll talk to you later, all right? Bye.